So we just got some huge news from Tim Canova, the former challenger of Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, the disgraced former chairwoman of the DNC. Let's check it out. So Tim Canova just sent out this huge email. I'm not gonna lie, I want to jump up out my seat and do a little jig because I was waiting for this. Y'all, I'm serious. I've been waiting for this email. I know a lot of you have too. And so let's direct our attention to the email that Tim Canova just sent out through his nonprofit Progress for All. Dear friend, every week I'm asked by countless people to please run against Debbie Wasserman-Schultz again in 2020. After more than 3 years fighting against her corrupt and detested machine, most voters know who I am, and so many have lost trust and confidence in the integrity of our elections, in large part because Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's own corrupt practices. There are presently 4 persons who have filed as candidates in Florida's 23rd Congressional District. Not one of them has had the courage to run against Debbie Wasserman-Schultz when she was chair of the Democratic National Committee in 2016. Not one had the courage to take on Brenda Snipes and other Broward election officials in 2018 when their crime spree was already so apparent. All 4 of these other candidates were content to look the other way in the face of mass ballot destruction and evidence tampering to cover up election rigging in their own district. These other candidates seem clueless, complicit, or both. They may talk about banning corporate money in elections or humanitarian crisis at our border with Mexico or endless partisan scandals in our nation's capital. But none of them have worked to expose the electronic rigging on our past elections in Broward County. While I have every intention of chasing Debbie Wasserman-Schultz from office, I will not be announcing my candidacy until the final filing deadline next spring. I have consistently said that I will not run again until and unless I feel assured that we can prevent the next election from being rigged by software manipulation, or we can detect and effectively contest any such rigging within the 10-day window of an election challenge. Therefore, until the filing deadline, I will continue to devote my time and energy to Progress for All to help expose and fix enormous flaws in our broken election system. Now, for those of you who do not know what Progress for All is Tim Canova's nonprofit that's dedicated to election integrity. And let me just give you a brief description that he has in the email. At Progress for All, we are building on what we have learned through the trials and errors of past elections. A nonpartisan citizens audit and an initiative we promoted for more than 2 years may become a reality in next year's elections in Broward County. More importantly, we are pushing for legislative reform and criminal prosecutions at every level of government, federal, state, and local. And to those ends, Progress for All will be bringing together leading election commissioners from around the country and experts in the United States elections, computer programming, and computational science for a public hearing on election security in Hollywood, Florida on December 5th. You can support our efforts by making your own donation. And all you have to do is go to progressforall.com. This is huge, people. Listen, everybody should know by now, if you're a fan of this show, Tim he's like part of the MCSC family. Outside of the fact that he has demonstrated an enormous amount of integrity, but like obviously he doesn't take corporate donations. He ran a juggernaut of a campaign. But most importantly, he didn't do what was expeditious for his career. He could have taken what he experienced, ran off somewhere, wrote a book, and continued to be the successful lawyer he had previously been, continued to be the successful professor that he had previously been. But instead, he doubled down, ran again as an independent. And guess what? Because of what Tim did, we know so much more about election fraud than we did before. Just take, for example, what happened the last time Tim ran as an independent when we thought, hey, well, if he runs as an independent, this would be, the Dems can't cheat him at that point, right? Like, it would be way too obvious if his numbers shrink drastically. Well, let's check out this video I did, or this interview I did with Redacted tonight, recounting exactly what we witnessed while I was on the ground, doing the activist side of this fun job I love so much.
Bernie, at least financially. So this is Tim Canova's second time running against Wasserman-Schultz, and you shared a video from down there in Broward County that has gone like crazy viral this week of something that should never happen in an election. What was that?
So essentially, a fan of my show, who also happened to be a volunteer for Tim Canova's campaign, showed me a video and asked if there was anything to it. And when I asked her about the contents of the video, she said that there was a bag full of ballots that was just sitting there. And when she asked why those ballots were sitting there, they said it's because the truck had already left. So in an effort to figure out if the truck had left, she goes outside, sees the truck is still there. But not only was the truck still there, but the video details how there were people driving their personal vehicles with no other observers in the vehicles with them. They brought in ballots from other precincts. Luckily, this volunteer had showed the video, and then I did a video on it, and then Tim Canova shared this video on his page. Marco Rubio retweeted it, and the next thing you know, we have election recounts and lawsuits all over Broward County and Palm Beach County and a few others as well.
And so it's not that these ballots aren't transported. They're just not supposed to be transported by regular civilians. It breaks the chain of custody. It's just completely, outside how these elections are supposed to be run. Have you tried to contact any of the people that were driving these vehicles? Do you know anything about them?
We don't know anything about them because they weren't officials. And right. You're right. It's not illegal to transport them. But the problem is that there was no other observer to hold them accountable, and the ballots were being brought in from other precincts into a unified location that wasn't the warehouse that they were supposed to be being transported to, and therefore they were being mixed up. And there were other issues. I was volunteering for Tim Canova as well, partly as media, but also as just an activist. And when I and my friend Suzanne were observing someone arbitrarily taking ballots out of a big pile and separating them, placing them neatly in another pile, but never doing anything with them, that person got nervous, called over whoever was in charge of that precinct, and then she told us that we weren't allowed to do this. Now, when I asked her why I wasn't allowed to be there as media, why I wasn't allowed to be there to observe either way, she said that I had to be registered. Then I asked her again, okay, well, what statute is that? Because to my understanding, observing does not require registration, which is true. So then she calls Brenda Snipes, and then Brenda Snipes tells my friend and Suzanne that we have to leave. Now, this wasn't the only example of this. Another friend of mine who wants to remain anonymous put up a video, and that video will be on my page today at the MCSC network on YouTube, where a precinct leader was actually moving machines in front of the people who were stacking the ballots to make sure that the observers from Tim Canova's campaign could not see what they were doing with those ballots. And that's just two of a numerous amount of horror stories that we heard down here.
Yeah, we've heard of this before in multiple cities, multiple states, where they just do not want people to be able to see what is going on, when in fact, that is the opposite of how our election system across this country is supposed to work. You're supposed to go and be able to watch these things. You're supposed to be able to see the audits. You're supposed to, we were told about people trying to watch the audit in New York City, and they're stacking up boxes and things to try and cover their view. They're saying they can be arrested. None of that is true, and it just raises the question of what do you have to hide? Why are you being so secretive?
Well, I could probably shed some light on that. So that very next day, I was working with Tim Canova to try to figure out exactly
how they were rigging the process against him, because obviously he got 25,000 votes the year before in a primary. So generally, in a general election, you would see somebody get more votes, especially when you have the same amount of support you had last time, plus all the extra people that you get to touch. That wasn't the case. He only won 5% of the vote, but we saw an interesting phenomena. The more votes that had been found over the course of the 2 to 3 days after the election, the less votes that Tim Canova had. But it wasn't limited to Tim Canova. Even Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's vote count was shrinking. Right. The problem was her individual percentage was increasing the less votes, the more votes that were disappearing from the tabulations. And we have screenshots and timestamps for all of this.
And that's never really supposed to happen. Once the voting has been tabulated, those numbers should not go down. Some may increase because various votes are decided to be legitimate. You know, people fill out affidavit votes and, oh, okay, those actually were legitimate votes. So it should increase. There's no reason that you should.
So, yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened. And we would have never figured this out if Tim Canova didn't have the balls to say, you know what? I'm tired of the Democratic Party. They screwed me, so I'm going to try to run as an independent. I'm not going to waste the money of the people who support me by doing the same thing. So not only obviously did he run as an independent, but he also has Progress for All, because just because he lost, like, do you understand? So we have a very bad tendency on the left, especially, to define our victories by who gets in office, you know, who wins the elections. We found out that you can't win as an independent for a federal election. That's what we found out. You understand that. Tim got he was more popular, raised a whole lot of money because of, you know, he record-breaking congressional candidate that's still in a lot of ways connected to Bernie as far as his name recognition is concerned. And he got less of the vote share. And I was on the ground, people. On the ground. Hell yeah, I'm voting for Tim Canova. Every single, to the point where the people out there campaigning for Debbie Wasserman-Schultz looked almost depressed. So Tim Canova shined a light on something that a lot of people had been questioning. Oh, why doesn't this federal candidate just run as independent? Why doesn't this federal candidate just run as independent? Because machines are rigged. Why doesn't Bernie Sanders run as an independent? Why doesn't Tulsi Gabbard run as an independent? Because the machines are rigged. Because the process is rigged. And until you address the process, then there's not really that much for us to talk about. It's easy to say, just run as independent. It's super easy. Why do you think it's not done more often? You think that they just want to utilize the apparatus of the Democratic Party? No, it's more complex than that. And Tim Canova found that out. And once again, he found that out and did what? He lost. And it sucked. But he didn't stop. He didn't let the Democratic establishment bully him away from holding the Democrats accountable. And look what happened because of it. Two supervisors, of 2 county board of elections in Florida were fired. And Brenda Snipes had the choice whether to be fired or to resign. So, of course, she resigned. And so now, because of the integrity and the conviction of Tim Canova in exposing Brenda Snipes in more than one way, he not only took care of corrupt actors in Broward County, of course, not all of them, but enough, you know, a huge dent, because that person was directly selected by Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. Not only did he do that, but he indirectly, because of the videos that we got, because of him constantly pursuing election integrity, because of us being vigilant about election integrity, he got 2 corrupt actors in 2 other counties that we didn't even know were corrupt at the time. You don't speak up because you're always expecting a result that benefits your personal agenda. You have to speak up because it's the right thing to do. Tim spoke up because it was the right thing to do. He continues to speak up because it's the right thing to do. And of course, he will absolutely continue to get my support. And when it's time, in April, when he finally files, best believe I'll be right there in that line, ready to campaign for him, to fundraise for him. I really hope that Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard will come down here. I will admit, part of my bias towards Tulsi is because of this very issue. Because when you've seen it in person, I live in Florida, people. How many times have we seen election integrity issues in Florida? I don't know. Maybe every single fucking year. And it's a swing state on top of it being rig heavy. And yet, Tulsi's introduced election integrity legislation. Now, the Democrats tried to copyright her legislation, water it down, and push it through the Senate. It's Amy Klobuchar's version of it, which is basically just making the situation worse. But Tulsi demonstrated that same integrity that made me respect Tim Canova's campaign so much, and Tim Canova personally so much. Tulsi took hits from the Democrats in the same way that I saw personally Tim Canova take hits. Because when she saw election rigging, she called it out, just like Tim Canova did. Taking on this establishment takes a lot out of you, especially when you're trying to change history. But you have to be able to stand up and fight while you're running, like Tim has been doing. Because if you don't stand up now, you'll definitely not stand up when you're trying to keep those benefits. You know what I'm saying? You're trying to retire after, 2 or 3 terms. You're trying to get those retiree benefits. You like your health care a lot. It's really hard to want to give all that power and success and money up. And let's be quite frank, your brand. That's why it's important that whenever we see people running for office, got to speak up now about election integrity. And this is why Tim will, of course, I don't live in his district anymore, unfortunately. But best believe, I will be up there campaigning for him, speaking at whatever events he needs me to speak at. And for those of you who can't be here, I strongly encourage you to donate to his campaign. And of course, until he announces his campaign, go to Progress for All. Let's start taking election integrity serious. Because all this other stuff, Medicare for all, and all this like housing and public, that sounds great, right? How are you going to get people in office to vote for all that shit? How? Just curious. Election integrity, number one issue. Tim Canova understands that, and that's why we need him in Congress.
Hey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you like that segment of Mikasa Sukasa. Also, you can help us upgrade the studio and take this show on the road to cover the on-the-ground politics that you love by clicking on that GoFundMe link in the description and donating literally anything. Anything helps. Also, you can follow us on Rockfin, on Twitter, and on Facebook as well. And hey, more than anything else, people, always remember, find your balance. Peace.